My husband handed me divorce papers and confidently declared, "I'm leaving you for someone else. You won't get anything." I simply smiled and signed every page. For the next week, he celebrated what he believed was an easy victory. But the moment he actually reviewed those signed documents, his confidence disappeared. Hello, everyone. This is Diana. I'm happy to have you here with me today. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. The life we had wasn't something that appeared overnight. I built it piece by piece with my own effort. And I mean that quite literally. During the early years of our marriage, I was the one sitting at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, working through spreadsheets while Daniel slept peacefully down the hall. When his landscaping company nearly failed in 2014, I took on a second job to keep us afloat. I found the house on Mercer Lane, negotiated the purchase price down by $11,000, and spent the entire first summer repainting every room because hiring contractors was beyond our budget. My name is Claire Harmon. I was 38 years old when my husband placed a manila envelope in front of me at our kitchen table and informed me that our marriage was over. But before I get to that day, some background is necessary. Up until that Tuesday morning, I believed we were a normal, stable family. Daniel and I had been married for 14 years. We had a 12-year-old daughter, Lily, who dreamed of becoming a marine biologist. We shared our home with a golden retriever named Biscuit, who left fur everywhere. We still had 9 years remaining on our mortgage, a joint savings account, and a standing reservation every Friday night at Carmine's on 5th. In every way that mattered, I thought we had built a life together. Daniel owned a landscaping company called Harmon and Green. Despite there being no partner named Green, he simply liked the name. I worked downtown as a senior project manager for an architectural firm. Over time, my salary quietly became the primary source of income for our household, especially after Daniel's business partner left in 2019 and the company never fully regained its footing. I never held that against him. Marriage, in my view, is a long-term commitment, and I had always treated it that way. The first warning sign appeared in October. It wasn't obvious at first. It was more like feeling a cold draft in a house without knowing exactly where it's coming from. Daniel suddenly became protective of his phone. Not occasionally, constantly. For years, he had left it lying around on countertops and couches without a second thought. Now it was always in his pocket, always face down, always locked. I convinced myself it meant nothing. People develop new habits. Privacy isn't unusual. Then November arrived. Daniel started claiming he had to work late every Thursday. That alone made little sense. Landscaping is a daytime business, and the administrative work was usually handled on Monday mornings with coffee and a notepad. Yet suddenly there were evening client meetings, a new account in Riverside, and commercial properties that supposedly required constant attention. One day I casually asked if I could look at one of the contracts. He replied that it hadn't been printed yet. I remembered that answer. At the same time, the atmosphere inside our home began to change. After 14 years together, you know another person's routines almost instinctively. You know how they move through a room, the sounds they make, and the habits they follow without thinking. Daniel and I had always spent evenings together on the couch after Lily went to bed. He would rest his feet in my lap, and I'd absent-mindedly place a hand on his ankle. By December, he had moved to the armchair. By January, he was going to bed before I did. I wasn't naturally suspicious. I had never been the type to inspect receipts or question mileage. But I was a project manager. My career revolved around recognizing patterns and identifying when something was off schedule, off budget, or off plan. And something was undeniably wrong. Before noon, Daniel's attorney contacted Karen. According to her, the conversation quickly became tense. Later that afternoon, Daniel called my cell phone while I was working at my desk. I ignored the first call and let it go to voicemail. 15 minutes later, he tried again. I ignored that one too. At 2:30, I finally listened to both messages. The first voicemail was controlled and carefully measured. He said we needed to have a conversation. He claimed I was unnecessarily complicating matters and insisted that the attorney should handle everything without introducing certain pieces of evidence. The second voicemail was different. His composure was gone. He accused me of invading his privacy. He said I was trying to ruin him. He admitted that he had misjudged how this situation would unfold. At one point, he used a harsh insult before abruptly stopping himself and apologizing, blaming stress for his behavior. Then came the threat. He claimed he could find people willing to testify about my conduct during our marriage. According to him, they would describe me as distant and emotionally unavailable, and he suggested a judge would view me negatively because of it. I saved both messages and immediately forwarded them to Karen. Soon afterward, Mara reached out. In hindsight, I should have expected it. She was never simply a bystander in all of this. Based on everything I had seen, she had willingly participated in the relationship with Daniel. Apparently, she found me through my professional LinkedIn profile. Her message was lengthy and conflicted in tone, alternating between apology and accusation. It felt as though she had revised it multiple times before sending it. She expressed regret for the pain the situation had caused. She claimed Daniel had told her the marriage had effectively ended years earlier, a familiar explanation in situations like these. She encouraged me to think about what was best for Lily and suggested that an extended legal battle would only hurt our daughter. Then she added that Daniel had deceived both of us and wasn't the person either of us believed him to be. She ended by saying she hoped we could all behave, in her words, maturely. The implication that defending my legal interests was somehow immature failed to convince me. I never replied. Instead, I forwarded the message to Karen and asked whether it crossed any legal boundaries. Karen explained that while the message was inappropriate and manipulative, it did not rise to the level of harassment or legal interference. Ignoring it, she said, was the smartest approach, so I ignored it completely. What I did not expect was for Daniel to involve my workplace. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning. I remember the day clearly because I had driven Lily to school and spent the trip realizing the windshield wipers needed replacing. That afternoon, my manager, Paul Gessner, asked me to come to his office. His expression immediately told me something uncomfortable had happened. Daniel, he explained, had called the company's main line. After speaking with the receptionist and eventually reaching Paul's assistant, he claimed I was suffering an emotional breakdown and might not be capable of managing my professional responsibilities. Even now, I find it astonishing that he thought such a tactic would work. Paul looked across his desk and said, "I didn't believe a single word, but I thought you should hear about it directly." I thanked him. I remained calm. So calm, in fact, that Paul asked if I was doing okay. I told him the truth. I was going through a divorce. My husband was upset about the legal proceedings, but I remained fully capable of performing my job and managing my responsibilities. Paul assured me that nothing would change professionally. Afterward, I called Karen from the parking garage and explained exactly what had happened. Her response was immediate. "That's actionable," she said. "Making false statements to your employer in an attempt to damage your professional reputation may qualify as interference and potentially defamation." By the end of the day, she had sent a formal letter to Daniel's attorney. The call stopped. Mara disappeared from the picture. From that point forward, everything flowed strictly through legal channels, exactly as it should. For the next few days, I focused on myself. I didn't leave town or take a vacation, but I deliberately carved out time to breathe. I had dinner with my sister in Westfield. I took Lily to an aquarium exhibit she had wanted to visit for months. I made sure I slept properly. One cold Thursday evening, I sat on the back porch of the Mercer Lane house with a glass of wine and looked out over the yard, the flower beds I had planted, the landscaping I had worked on, the oak tree Lily and I had named together when she was 4 years old. For the first time since receiving that manila envelope, I felt something close to peace. Not triumph, not yet, but I felt the satisfaction of knowing I had not panicked. I had not surrendered. I had not allowed 14 years of work and sacrifice to be dismissed simply because a man sat across from me and confidently declared that I would receive nothing. He was finally facing resistance. By the second week of March, Daniel's attorney submitted a revised settlement proposal. Karen called me to review it. The new offer increased my share of the home's equity, completely removed the fabricated loan claim, and proposed a 55 to 45 split of the savings account in my favor. The valuation of Daniel's business had also changed. According to the revised paperwork, it was now worth approximately $65,000, still significantly below Roy Finch's independent valuation. "He's testing your resolve," Karen said. "I know," I replied. "The fact that the loan disappeared is important. It means they understand it won't survive examination." "What about the business valuation?" "Still far too low," she answered. "And there's no meaningful recognition of your financial contributions during the years the company struggled." "Then it's not enough." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." What made the proposal particularly manipulative was not the legal language. It was the handwritten note attached to it. Daniel had written it himself on stationery we had purchased together during a fall trip to Vermont 4 years earlier. I recognized the paper immediately. In the note, he wrote that he regretted how things had unfolded. He said Lily deserved parents who could remain respectful toward one another. He claimed the revised offer demonstrated his willingness to negotiate in good faith. The entire thing felt carefully engineered. Mentioning Lily was intentional. Writing it by hand was intentional. Using that particular stationery was either remarkably careless or deliberately calculated. I never decided which. I set the note aside. Not because I felt nothing, because I felt too much. Over the previous weeks, I had learned an important lesson. Emotions were valuable sources of information, but poor guides for decision-making. The note told me Daniel was worried. The revised offer suggested his attorney recognized weaknesses in their position. The disappearance of the fake loan confirmed that their earlier strategy had been a bluff. And I had called it. My instructions to Karen were simple. Reject the proposal, use Finch's valuation as the minimum acceptable figure, demand full recognition of my financial contributions, and an equitable division of every marital asset, including the business growth accumulated during the marriage. During this period, Mara remained silent publicly. Privately, however, I learned through a mutual acquaintance named Deborah that she had been telling people I was prolonging the divorce out of bitterness. According to her version of events, I was weaponizing the legal process while Daniel suffered as the victim of a woman unwilling to move on. Deborah shared this information with me over coffee one Saturday. "Do you want me to correct people?" she asked. "No," I said, "but thank you for telling me." And I genuinely meant it. Deborah, my sister Rachel, and my colleague Priya became the 3 people outside my immediate family who understood everything that was happening. Priya, having survived her own difficult divorce years earlier, offered something invaluable. Not advice, presence. Her messages were simple. "How are you sleeping? Have you eaten today? Need me to take Lily this weekend?" When I told her I was okay, she accepted the answer without treating me like I was fragile. That quiet trust was one of the greatest gifts anyone offered me during that period. One evening, while sitting in my car outside a grocery store, I admitted something to Rachel over the phone. I told her I was scared, not of losing the legal case. I believed in our position. I was afraid of what would happen after it was over, whether I would finally have space to feel everything I had been postponing. Rachel was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You'll have time to grieve later. Right now, you're building the foundation that will allow you to grieve safely. Keep going." I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes after the call ended. Then I went inside, bought groceries, went home, made dinner, helped Lily with her homework, and carried on. Looking back, that was the month I became extremely difficult to defeat. Yes, Daniel replied. She was helping support the business. It was either an investment or a loan. Karen immediately followed up. You were married at the time. Are you claiming those were simply household funds? Daniel nodded slightly. We were married. It all came from the household. Karen didn't let the statement stand. Those transfers came from her personal account, Mr. Harmon, not a joint account. Her personal account, funded by her salary. Are you now characterizing money from her individual earnings as household funds? Brackett lightly touched Daniel's arm. You can answer. Daniel shifted in his seat. Our finances were commingled, he began. Karen calmly opened the next section of her binder. The accounts were separate and fully documented as separate, she said. The second tab contained Roy Finch's appraisal. The valuation was clear, $112,000. It included supporting methodology, comparable business sales, equipment values, vehicle assets, and client contract evaluations. Several of those contracts had been secured during years when my income was helping keep the business operating. Karen placed the report on the table. Your attorney submitted a valuation of $40,000. A certified independent appraiser has valued the business at $112,000. Can you explain the difference? Daniel studied the document. Then he glanced toward Brackett. Finally, he looked back at the report. Equipment depreciates, he said. The appraiser accounted for depreciation, Karen replied. The primary difference comes from the value assigned to existing client contracts. Were those omitted from your valuation? I didn't omit anything. My accountant. Did you instruct your accountant regarding the valuation? I provided information. Did you instruct him to exclude the client contract portfolio? The room fell silent. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but in a deposition room it felt much longer. Eventually, Daniel answered. I gave him the information I had. His voice had changed. Not dramatically. Daniel was not someone who exploded under pressure. He rarely raised his voice, but there was a noticeable flattening in his tone, the sound of someone beginning to realize the situation is no longer unfolding according to plan. I recognized that voice. Years earlier, when he had made a serious business mistake and had to explain it to a client, I had heard the same thing. It was the voice of a man recalculating. Karen moved to the third tab. Photographs, timelines, cross-referenced records. She didn't present them emotionally, she presented them as evidence. Each item established that Daniel had made specific claims about where he was and what he was doing on particular dates. The records demonstrated those statements were false. More importantly, those false statements occurred during the same period he was asking me to sign a settlement agreement that also contained misleading financial representations. Karen glanced toward the court reporter. A pattern of material misrepresentation, she said quietly. Daniel's composure didn't collapse all at once. It unraveled gradually. By the time Karen reached the third tab, he had stopped looking at me. When discussion turned to the phone call he had made to my employer and the inaccurate statements he made about my mental state, he began rubbing his thumb against the edge of the table, a nervous habit I had seen countless times over 14 years. Brackett began interrupting more often. Those interruptions told me everything I needed to know. He was no longer guiding a confident client. He was containing damage. Then came a particular question about a Thursday evening in November, one of the nights Daniel claimed he was meeting a client in Riverside. As Karen reviewed the evidence, Daniel finally looked up. For the first time that morning, our eyes met. I don't know exactly what he was searching for. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps understanding, perhaps simply acknowledgement that we both knew what was happening. Whatever it was, he didn't find it. I met his gaze calmly and without expression. I wasn't angry. I wasn't pleased. I was simply present, completely present. And I think that unsettled him more than anything else. A moment later, he looked away. We took a 15-minute break around 11 o'clock. Karen and I stood together in the hallway. He won't pursue the custody threat, she said quietly. You're certain? The employer call alone exposes him to potential defamation issues. The valuation discrepancies create serious risks regarding settlement misrepresentation. He doesn't have much leverage left. She paused. And he knows it. I looked down the hallway. The beige carpeting, the framed artwork, the water fountain marked out of order. Everything looked ordinary. Completely ordinary. Okay, I said. Karen studied me for a moment. How are you holding up? I'm fine. And for once, that wasn't a performance. I truly was. Not numb, not detached, just steady. The preparation had held. The following Thursday, Brackett called Karen, not to threaten, to negotiate. That difference told me everything. After the deposition, their position had weakened significantly. The concerns surrounding the business valuation were now part of the official record. The false statements made to my employer had become documented. The custody argument they had hinted at disappeared entirely. No further mention of it appeared in any communication. Karen spoke with Brackett for nearly 90 minutes. Later that afternoon, she called me. They're ready to settle. I leaned back in my chair. What's the offer? She explained each term carefully. The house would be sold. 60% of the net proceeds would go to me. The savings account would be divided 65 to 35 in my favor. The business would be valued at $90,000, below Finch's estimate, but significantly higher than Daniel's original figure. My share of that value would be included in the settlement. The fictional 2016 loan claim was gone entirely. Daniel would keep the business and all associated liabilities. I would retain my retirement account in full. Custody would be shared, with Lily living primarily with me and standard support arrangements based on income. Karen, I said. Yes? Is this fair? She considered the question carefully. It isn't everything we could theoretically argue for, she said, but it's defensible, practical, and substantially better than where we started. I thought about that morning in February. The envelope. The confidence, the certainty in Daniel's voice when he said I would get nothing. I thought about the handwritten note, the manipulation, the threats, the lies, the photographs stored in that cloud folder, the timestamps that told the truth more clearly than he ever had. Accept it, I said. The final paperwork was signed on a gray Tuesday in April. We weren't even in the same room. Karen handled my side. Brackett handled his. The documents moved between offices by messenger. It felt fitting. When the final signature page was placed before me, I paused briefly. No one was watching. No one needed a dramatic moment. The decision belonged entirely to me. I remembered the first papers Daniel had pushed across our kitchen table. How confident he had been. How certain he was that I would simply agree. Everything had been built around that assumption. The fake loan, the undervalued business, the emotional appeals, the threats, the pressure. Every strategy depended on one belief, that eventually I would give in. That assumption turned out to be the most expensive mistake he made. I signed, calmly, neatly. The same way I signed every professional document throughout my career. No drama, no hesitation, just certainty. That evening, Karen called. It's finished, she said. Thank you. And I meant it. That night, Lily helped set the table. Biscuit wandered through the kitchen as usual. Outside, the daylight lingered longer than it had all winter. For the first time in months, the future felt open again. I hadn't won a war. That's important to say. I simply protected what belonged to me. I refused to surrender what I had spent years building. And sometimes that is victory enough. The Mercer Lane house sold in June. Surprisingly, leaving it was easier than I expected. When I walked through the empty rooms one final time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt completion, a chapter ending exactly where it needed to. A few weeks later, I bought a smaller home 6 miles away. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a park nearby, and a kitchen window that filled the room with morning sunlight. On my first morning there, standing at the sink with a cup of coffee, I exhaled more deeply than I had in months. Lily chose a deep teal paint color for her room, not what I would have picked, which made it perfect. That September, my architectural firm promoted me to associate director. In truth, I had been doing the job for years. Now the title simply caught up. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about Daniel. The business struggled, some major contracts were lost. He took on additional work to supplement his income. Eventually, I learned that his relationship with Mara wasn't quite as ideal as either of them had imagined. I didn't feel satisfaction, only the sense that events were following their natural course. One evening in October, Rachel sat with me on the porch of my new house. After listening to everything from beginning to end, she looked at me and said, "You scared me." "I know. Not because I thought you'd lose," she said, "because I knew what it was costing you to keep going at that pace." I looked across the yard. Smaller than the old one, but entirely mine. "I'm okay," I told her. And this time, I truly was. Months later, Lily asked me a simple question. "Mom, are you happy?" I thought carefully before answering. "Yes." I smiled. "I am." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to reading her book about coral reefs. At the beginning of all this, Daniel told me I would get nothing. He was wrong, not because I was lucky, because I refused to sign anything I didn't fully understand, because I verified every claim, because I stayed calm when calmness was mistaken for weakness. The lesson was never really about divorce. It was about understanding your own worth well enough that nobody else gets to define it for you. If you had been sitting at that kitchen table, looking at that envelope, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening.